travelers, and welcome to Go See, Do, Explore.
Here, we dive deep into the heart of travel, sharing hidden gems, unforgettable experiences, and the stories that make each destination unique.
Whether you're a seasoned traveler or dreaming of your next getaway, you're in the right place to get inspired.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashley.
And together, we'll set the course for your next great adventure and discover the stories that make each place unforgettable.
It's time to go, see, and do more. Let's explore.
Hello, today we're talking about some news in the travel industry, not something that we normally talk about that much, but given that our first episode was the case for ultra-low-cost airlines, this news is big. Last Friday, which was Friday the 17th of May, Frontier Airlines made a big announcement about changes to fee structures. We're going to talk a little bit about what those changes are, why they're doing it. We're going to talk about response by various competitors, and just our take on what this means for you, what this means for the airline industry. It's very interesting and exciting stuff. And so Frontier announced what they called the New Frontier Initiative. And it covers a few different areas. They're trying to be more transparent with pricing. We'll talk about what that means in just a moment. They're eliminating change in cancellation fees, at least to a certain extent. We'll talk about that too. They've got a new 4 less price guarantee. They've made changes to their customer support, and they have a new Upfront Plus seating option. Let's talk a little bit about what this means, and then, we'll talk about what's driving it. So Frontier announced 3 new fare bundles, what they're calling the Economy Bundle, the Premium Bundle, and the Business Bundle. And you can go to their website, you can see what this looks like. Most of them are the same, except that the seat selection is different. And in the business bundle, you get what they're calling Upfront Plus seats. We'll talk more about that in a second.
I know when you first saw this, you were like, Frontier is starting a business class.
Yeah. And actually, now that I've done some research and read a little bit more, they are. We'll talk about that.
But it's more so just a bundle of more stuff.
So I'm not going to read all these. You can go to the website and check it out. But for example, in the economy bundle, you get to pick a seat. In the premium bundle, you get to pick a premium seat. And in the business bundle, you get one of these upfront seats, right? And they come with different levels of baggage, and they all come with no change or cancellation fee. So this was the announcement over and above the big announcement, the announcement that's being driven by regulatory activity that we're going to talk about, which is this no change or cancellation fee. Frontier coming up big saying, we're not going to charge you anymore for changes or cancellations. But the thing you need to know is that to get that, you need to purchase one of these bundles. And I think that's a little bit of, I won't call it deceptive, but that's a little bit of the catch to this. They're emphasizing, obviously, what they're doing, which is, hey, if you buy one of these bundles, we're not going to charge you a cancellation fee if you change it. But what they're not emphasizing is if you don't buy one of these bundles, there are still change fees and cancellation fees. And that was the big announcement. Now, a couple other features here. They have this 4 less price guarantee, which I find really fascinating. What it says on their website is if you find a flight on another carrier, same day, same route, similar flight, and it is less expensive than Frontier, they will give you 2,500 Frontier miles. That's pretty much what the website says. What this means in practice is that if you find that flight and stick with your Frontier flight, after you've completed that flight, they will give you 2,500 miles. So it's essentially an incentive to not change for a less expensive flight or to not cancel for a less expensive flight, which obviously you could do. If you bought one of these bundles, you could do it. And so they're trying to hedge against that. But at first I thought, are they just going to price match or something like that? No, they're not going to price match. They're giving you a little mileage bribe to not change. Another big change that Frontier announced is the way that they're handling customer support. Now, we've probably made fun of it before. I think we talked about it on the case for ultra low cost airlines that with Frontier, you basically have to pay to talk to someone. They don't have phone support. You could obviously go to the check-in agent to hand them your bag that you've tagged. But if you want any kind of support in the airport, you pay a fee for that in advance. They're definitely changing the phone support. And I don't know right now the state of the other types of support and if they're still expecting to be able to charge for that. But I would not be surprised if that is also going away as a part of this.
Is there any other airline that you have to pay to speak to a gate agent? It's a little ridiculous. They're already there.
Yeah.
But you got to pad their salary somehow.
And then this Upfront Plus seating option is the other piece. And this was the piece that I was excited about because I know we've talked about how we do love Spirit's big front seats. But I was curious because Frontier's planes today, their fleet, I think the first 2 rows are extended legroom, but they're 3-3. It's 3 seats on each side of the aisle still. And so I thought, okay, this announcement just came out. There's no way they're just retrofitting planes right now or anything like that. What they're doing is they're blocking the middle seat. And so those first couple rows on Frontier's fleet that already have extra legroom, they're going to block the middle seat. And this does make it into what is often referred to in the industry as European-style business class. A lot of the European carriers, their business class is not a bigger seat, but it's just that they block the middle seat and put like a little tray table there. And so it gives you a little bit more room to spread out.
Here's a question, though. So say you're booked on a flight next week on Frontier and somebody was already paid for that seat. What's happening? Are they kicking them out?
I got to imagine that they're I don't know. This news is really fresh, and in truth, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. The way they made the announcement, it was like, this is happening right now. I don't know if maybe they haven't sold those seats, if this announcement was planned, or I don't know. I can't imagine they're bumping anyone for this. That feels like that.
You're off the flight.
Yeah.
This seat has to be empty now.
Yeah, and maybe they're rolling into it. But that was, like I said, when I saw the business bundle at first, I was like, wow, they're getting a business class? But then I read it and said, oh, they're not getting a business class. But now that I've done more research, they are getting a business class. With the business bundle, you get one of these European-style business class seats. You additionally get 2 checked bags and a carry-on. That's a business class. I wonder if people will start flying Frontier for business.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
We haven't had the best experience on Frontier. Not to make this episode that, but we've had 8 Frontier flights and all but 2 of them were delayed. Unless they're fixing that, I don't.
Yeah. And what we just don't know yet, I don't think, apart from some miscellaneous price searching I've done, is what the impact this will ultimately have on their fares will be too. So why are they doing this? It's been in the news that the FAA and the Department of Transportation have been pushing for some changes in the industry, and this is a direct response to that. What the Department of Transportation is asking for essentially is what they're referring to as increased transparency and the elimination of what they refer to as junk fees. Now, we talked about these fees on the first episode of our podcast. We didn't refer to them as junk fees, but we talked about the way that these airlines will nickel and dime you and how no one really likes that, but how we as travelers have managed to get past the annoying factor there and just make a mathematical decision on final prices.
It's not simple. It's not quick. You have to have multiple screens with different stuff going on and in the end determine which is better for you, which going with one of their bundles or doing an a la carte. But you've got to put some work into it. Maybe this will do away with that necessity. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and we'll talk more in a moment about exactly what they're asking for. So I think this is a way for airlines like Frontier to change the story a little bit, and that not only as they're being forced to comply with new regulation that they'll do that, but now that some of these fees are going to be highlighted in a more obvious way, they have ways of talking about avoiding them or minimizing them, like pay by this bundle and then you won't have to pay this fee. But the thing is, when you buy the bundle, you are paying. You're just paying differently. You're just paying differently, and maybe less, definitely less if you are going to change or cancel. But yeah, it's a way to change the story a little bit and I think make some press. Now, one thing that is also worth mentioning about Frontier is that it seems like they're trying to reposition themselves a little bit. And this, we'll get to broader questions about the industry in a little bit, but I really wonder, airlines like Frontier, airlines like Spirit, they didn't start ultra low cost, but they found that niche in the market as the market evolves. And you wonder if Frontier is looking, to boost customer service, to include more things, if they are moving away from this ultra low cost model, if they believe that they can be more profitable given the new regulations in more of a JetBlue space or something like that. And it makes you wonder about Spirit too, of course.
And it's interesting to note too that this is happening after Frontier and Spirit's possible merger fell through, and then after the JetBlue Spirit merger was struck down. It's an interesting time in the U.S. low-cost airline space.
Right. Will JetBlue, Spirit, and Frontier end up being similar prices? Will this drive up the price of ultra low cost? Yeah, let's talk about Spirit, because this was something that, just as I was researching and making sure we had everything together for this episode, I saw, oh, look, Spirit's made a big announcement too. So Spirit just made a change to their change in cancellation fees. They didn't mess around with bundles or anything like that.
At least not yet.
But what they basically said was, if you want to change or cancel 60 days or more out, no charge. And then if you change or cancel inside of 6 days, I think it's $119. And then there's some sort of a sliding scale between those 2 points. And you can go check that out. It does seem to me like this was a pretty hurried decision. I don't know. We wouldn't know. We would have no way to know. Today, May 19th, if you go to the Spirit Airlines website, it looks like someone threw it up there in about 10 minutes. It's just really sloppy and, oh, we're doing this too. What's interesting about Spirit is that this actually puts them in a position where their policies are better than airlines like Delta or American, and that's just interesting. I can't imagine that this is going to be allowed to stand with the legacy carriers. They're going to have to make changes too. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But Spirit now is not making you buy anything, and you just have that. 60 days or more, you can cancel at no charge. And then $119 inside of a week, you probably only paid $45 for that flight, so I don't really know how that's going to make sense.
You just don't get on the plane, I think.
Yeah. But Spirit now, I think, has maybe the best cancellation policy in the U.S. airline industry, which is shocking. And unlike Frontier, you don't have to pay. That is what's happening. We're going to talk more about the DOT and the FAA and what they're trying to get at here. But before we do that, let's go to a wine break. We're here for the wine break, and today we're revisiting a winery that we've talked about before, and that is Mauby, which is a Michigan winery on the Leelanau Peninsula that specializes in sparkling wine. Today we have Mauby Neon. Neon is a sparkling wine made from Cayuga White. Cayuga White is a North American hybrid grape. I think it was developed at Cornell. It's definitely named after Cayuga Lake, which is the lake that Ithaca, New York is on. So I think good guess that it was developed at
Cornell. Ever heard of it?
Cornell, ever heard of it? Yeah. So Mauby is big into these kinds of hybrids. They do a lot with them, and they grow well in Michigan, of course, so that makes sense. They've been doing that for a long time. It's made in the cuvée closée method, or that's also known as the Charmat method, or sometimes the tank method. What that means is that the way that the carbonation is done is by first making a still wine, then putting that wine in a stainless steel tank, adding some yeast and some sugar, and then the wine produces CO2, and because it's a closed system, the wine carbonates. And so this is different from what's referred to as the traditional method or the champagne method or the method champenoise, which is the one done in the bottle. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that process of they make a wine, and then in the bottle they add a little bit more yeast, a little bit more sugar, and they make sparkling wine that way. In Champagne and then around the world, the traditional method is used, including places like in Spain where they make much of cava is made that way. This method is very common for, among other wines, Prosecco in Italy, made in the area around Venice. And it's a really great method because it produces a high quality sparkling wine, but it is much more cost effective than the champagne method or the traditional method. And it's a really good kind of middle of the market sparkling wine process, and one of my favorites. I really like what it produces. It's not quite as yeasty as a champagne or that style of wine, but it's always really nice. What do you think of this wine?
It's really good. It's very tart.
Mm-hmm. The bottle says electrifying acidity.
Thus.
Neon. Yeah. ABV only 9%. It's low. I'm not complaining about that. It's nice. It's nice. You don't really want a sparkling wine to knock you out. So
that explains why when I Googled it, I got a lot of results about low alcohol wine from Lobby.
Yeah, interesting.
It's also whole cluster.
Oh yes, whole cluster pressing, which if you're not familiar, it's exactly what it sounds like. When wine is made, usually for white wine, the grapes are separated from the leaves and stems, and then they are crushed. With whole cluster pressing, usually some portion of what's being crushed is left on the stem. Not 100%, typically. That would produce a wine that's very bitter, but you leave some of the stems in there, and what that gives to the wine is astringency or bitterness, and that can balance other things, right? Like bitterness sounds like a bad thing, and if a wine was just bitter, of course that would be bad. But bitterness in combination with other factors like sweetness and acidity produces a wine that's more complex, more layered, and can be more interesting to drink. And so whole cluster is something I'm really into. I always love a wine that has some whole cluster pressing. Yeah, I'm happy that's here.
Mauby's always good. It's always, especially when it's warm out. You want something light and refreshing.
Definitely. And it is hot today.
Yes, it is.
So we will be enjoying this.
Tomorrow's going to be another scorcher.
We're back from our wine break, and we're going to talk just a little bit more about what is happening with the U.S. Department of Transportation that's driving these industry changes, and what are some other impacts that we may see. And so you can go online, you can read on the DOT website the summary of what they're asking for, which is quite lengthy and fairly repetitive. But it comes down to this: fees for baggage, for changes, cancellations, as well as adjacent seats for young family members must be disclosed along with the flight prices. That's the language I found. If there are more specifics than that, I haven't come across them. But today, when you go to book on Spirit or on Frontier or any of these other airlines, honestly, even some of the legacy carriers, you first get your flight price, and then a lot of times after you enter your personal information, which is just obnoxious to me, then you're picking seats, picking bags. They want to put that as far along in the process as possible so that you're less likely to bail on it, even though I'll just have 3 tabs open and be working at all kinds of, is it more?
Multiple computers.
Yeah. Is it better to do the bundle? Is it better? Like, I just do that. But the federal government, the Biden administration in particular, has made it clear that they don't like this. They've referred to that as junk fees, and they want those things disclosed up front. The other big piece of it is that if you buy airfare through agents, third parties, we don't. If you do that, then those people need to have those fees so that they can disclose those fees too. Like, I'll give you an example. I was just searching for flights the other day on Google Flights, and I knew that we would have carry-ons. So in Google Flights, I punched in our carry-ons, and for most of the carriers, it gave me the prices with those bags. But with Spirit, for example, it just said, we don't know. Spirit hasn't formally disclosed their baggage prices to Google Flights, and therefore Google Flights is going to pretend like they don't know, even though Google knows, I'm sure.
When you were looking, you were finding that their carry-on checked bag isn't always consistent now.
It
seems to be depending on the route, depending on the day.
Yeah, the first time I ever saw that. The other key piece of this is a change to the way that refunds need to be handled when flights are canceled or significantly delayed.
Did they explain what significantly delayed means? I'm curious.
I didn't come across it. It's possible it's buried in like language that's deeper than I read, but in the summaries, no, I didn't come across it.
I just have to say that it's ridiculous that it took a federal law to make that a thing. Because if there's in any other industry, if you pay for a service and you don't get the service, you get your money back. What is this nonsense? They didn't perform the service as was agreed upon. I feel like that was a necessary change.
A big factor was the timing, right?
Yeah.
It has to get to you faster now. They can't hold your money for 2 weeks or whatever. But that's the gist of it. And so that's what all airlines, by the way, not just low-cost carriers, all airlines are being subjected to. It stems from a 2021 executive order called Promoting Competition in the American Economy, which gave instructions to various departments of the federal government to make rules that foster fair competition, transparency, benefit consumers, things like that. And so the DOT is taking their rulemaking from that executive order. Now, one thing that's interesting about this activity is it seems like the low-cost carriers are the ones really making news here. This is who it was really directed at. But the legacies are getting concerned too. And in fact, they've filed a lawsuit against the federal government. Delta, United, Alaska, American, Hawaiian, JetBlue, and the trade association Airlines for America have filed a lawsuit against the Department of Transportation. And basically they say that this is arbitrary and unnecessary. And so if you think about when you book a flight on one of these legacy carriers, yeah, the bags, the seats, that's all after, right? You just like these low costs. The difference is usually when you go to that second tier, like main cabin, you get it all pretty much. Maybe not a check bag, but you get pretty much everything else. And their check bag fees are usually a lot less, so it's not as big of a deal. But it is the same idea. And I don't know what their disclosure is to the third parties because, again, we don't book airlines through third parties and you shouldn't either. But
it's true.
Yeah. But they're saying it's unnecessary. I don't know a whole lot about this lawsuit yet. I think it's really interesting. I could be persuaded on the unnecessary point. I could be persuaded because I just think at the end of the day, it's not really that hard. But their lawyers are alleging that it's going to confuse consumers. I would be very interested to hear the arguments around how a simple disclosure of fees is going to be confusing.
Oh no, I'll never figure it out.
What am I paying? I guess maybe they intend to put it on their website in a way that meets the letter of the law, but is confusing.
They're going to make it confusing for their lawsuit.
Yeah, but I don't know. The DOT definitely intends to fight this and defend. And there's just a lot going on here that'll be really interesting to see. Want to talk a little bit about what this might mean for the future. Of course, none of us really know. But is this a win for consumers? Is this going to make things better? Is this, another knife in the back of Spirit Airlines, which is already dying? I don't really know.
The U.S. government is coming for Spirit Airlines. What it seems.
I'm encouraged by what seems to me to be a pro-consumer movement. Right, like we complained, even though we play the ultra low cost carrier game. Obviously, we complained about it in our first episode. I will be very happy to see the customer service situation improve. Certainly, things like turning refund money around. But what I wonder about, and I'm not an expert, but just what I wonder is, are these the ways that airlines like Spirit and Frontier can stick around, and can those airlines survive this without having to change their pricing model to essentially be similar to legacies? And if they have to do that, how is that any different than the reasons for which the federal government blocked the Spirit JetBlue merger? Was that a merger of JetBlue and Spirit would effectively raise prices and price people out of the airline industry, or price people out of flights. That was the core of the government's argument against that merger. It seems to me that this could do the exact same thing, doesn't it?
No, absolutely.
For us, we're thankfully in a position, at least in this moment, where we're not worried about Spirit raising their prices a little bit, but there are definitely people that rely on that for transportation. And it's really interesting to see.
If your choices are Spirit or Greyhound, you're going to be in trouble.
Well, yeah. I think that one thing that is maybe a good indicator here is that a lot of the European airlines, the low-cost carriers, have been under more stringent regulation for a long time. And from what I understand, rules similar to this have been in place for European carriers for a while, and they obviously still exist. There are plenty of them, in fact. Ryanair
is notorious.
Yeah. But then, a lot of those European airlines are subsidized too. And so it's just, obviously the American economy is a different beast than the economies of various European countries. I really don't know what this is going to do. So I hope that it ends up being good for the consumer and not like we gained some ground here but lost some ground somewhere else. But we really don't know. I also wonder, like I mentioned, Spirit now having effectively the best cancellation policy in the American airline industry. What is that going to do to the legacies? Like I said, I don't think they're going to let that stand. I think they're going to have to change too. And that will be good for the consumer because those airlines are basically banks, as was made famous in a few articles last year. And so they can do this. They can make that happen. And I am excited about that.
I wonder if Spirit's more favorable cancellation fees will mean better prices for last-minute flights.
Oh, that's really interesting because there would theoretically be last-minute availability. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe that's where they're going to really stick the screws in and be like, this is where we'll make our money. I don't know. This is very new. This is very fresh. We actually bumped some other episodes to get this one out because we felt like this is timely and interesting. We're by no means experts, but we're very interested. And we definitely want to keep this conversation going and keep watching and seeing what happens. So that does it for our conversation on these airline changes today. But we will keep watching and we may be talking about it again soon. Who knows? Next, we're doing a destination spotlight, and we wanted to talk about the 12 hours we spent last summer in Iceland.
In our attempt to find the world's cheapest flights, last summer we were coming back from Madrid, looking to fly to Detroit, and we found a kind of complicated series of flights that got us to Detroit, but with I think it was total 14-hour layover in Iceland. And it was pretty much the cheapest option for us to get home. Our little time that we had in Iceland was amazing. But the other fees that came into kind of like what we were talking about earlier in this episode, the other fees that came into this short little layover in Iceland probably made some of those other flights a little cheaper. So we arrived, I want to say it was 2 or 3 a.m. when we got off the plane in Keflavik, which is, I don't know if suburb is the right word, but it's outside of Reykjavik.
So, yeah, 30-minute drive. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we needed a place to sleep because, like I said, it was the middle of the night. And the Keflavik airport, even though they have lots of these flights, they don't have any way for you to sleep in their airport.
Yeah, they're really actually, if you go to Sleeping in Airports, which is a great website, they'll tell you that basically you're going to get kicked out or at least harassed if you try to sleep there overnight. And there are no hotels on site.
There are no hotels on site. And so we ended up staying. We found a place on booking.com that was the Keflavik guest house or something like that. Kef guest house. And
it was fine.
It was fine. Small room with a shared bathroom, which was odd. But at the same time, we were barely there.
Yeah.
There was a jail cell for some reason.
There was a jail cell, for real. I don't know what that is.
And a shower that was only blazing, scalding hot. So not my favorite hotel experience.
Yeah, straight from the geyser.
Straight out of the geothermal ground. And of course, we wanted to rent a car so that we could see a little bit of this part of Iceland. But all the rental cars in Iceland require a 2-day minimum to rent a car. So this was pricey for what was half a day, essentially. It was an expensive half a day. So we got our car, I think it was blue rental car.
It was blue.
Or something like that. And we did a little driving tour of the, I'm sorry to the Icelandic people, Reykjanes Peninsula.
I don't know how to say it. I've never known how to say it.
We got started early in the morning because the sun essentially never sets in Iceland in the summer. And so it got bright and we were just up. We went to a bakery and got a little breakfast. And then we headed out on our tour of this part of Iceland. And there was like no one else around. It was pretty cool. We stopped at a few little overlooks and there was maybe 1 or 2 other cars. You compare this to where we just were in Madrid, which was 1,000 degrees and people everywhere. It was pretty cool. We saw geysers and hot springs. And of course, this area is known for the Blue Lagoon. I'm sure you've seen it on Instagram or whatever. We decided that we didn't want to spend the short time we had in Iceland only seeing the Blue Lagoon. And I do regret that we didn't get to see Blue Lagoon, but honestly, it's very touristy and you don't see the other side of that selfie that you see on Instagram, and that is like the wall-to-wall people in Blue Lagoon.
Here's what they don't tell you about Blue Lagoon. It's runoff from the geothermal power plant, which doesn't make it unsafe. I don't want to make it sound like, when I say that, it sounds like, oh no, runoff. It's from the geothermal power plant. There's no chemicals or anything.
It's not a nuclear power plant.
But the point is that it's actually, I found that very interesting, that it's not natural.
It's not natural. No. It's just like a way for you to use the water that's cooling off after it just provided electricity.
Yeah.
So I do regret that we didn't get to do Blue Lagoon, but at the same time, when we landed in the airport, I saw this big billboard for something called Sky Lagoon, which looked a lot cooler than Blue Lagoon because it was almost if you took the Blue Lagoon and turned it into an infinity pool.
Yeah.
It was like you're in the geothermal pool and then you saw like the cliffs and the ocean. I think that would have been so much cooler. So whenever we make our return to Iceland, I would probably head there over Blue Lagoon.
Yeah, the water's not blue though.
The water is not blue. No, that's true. But there's also less people in it. So I think that's a win.
Yeah.
And then in our adventure, we found what was advertised anyway as possibly the best fish and chips in the world.
I think it was maybe the best fish in the world.
Maybe the best fish in the world.
It was good.
It was good. It was salt cod, which we learned to love in Portugal.
Maybe the best fish in the world.
It may have been. It was possibly the most expensive fish in the world.
It was very expensive.
Yeah. And it was in Icelandic krona, which is...
It's a tough ratio. I don't remember, but it's something like 70,000 Icelandic krona is $250 or so. It's a hard one to have in your head.
You just hand over your credit card and you cross your fingers and hope that it's not going to be too expensive, which is Iceland, so probably
I think we paid $50 for a very modest fish and chips lunch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was expensive. Overall, our layover in Iceland was amazing. It was beautiful. There weren't a ton of other people around, which was nice. But it wasn't the budget experience that we had originally thought we were getting.
Yeah, although I think if you compared the cost of all that to the cost of, let's say, one of those Air France flights that was Madrid to Detroit through Paris or something like that, maybe we spent a little bit more, but not much more. And we got to see another country that lots of people from the U.S. are going to now, but really only recently has that been a big destination.
Well, especially because Iceland Air is really ramping up its flights to the U.S. Mm-hmm. The Keflavik airport, once you go through passport control and you are out of the Schengen zone, was very crowded because there were so many flights to the U.S. I do feel like they need to do some renovations to that airport if they're going to continue this amount of flights to the U.S. because once you got through passport control, there was one set of bathrooms and one little food option. And obviously you don't want to wait going through passport control because you don't know how long it's going to take. And then you got pulled aside for extra security screenings. And so you want to...
person.
Yeah, you're very suspicious. So you want to give yourself enough time for that. But then to get through passport control and see the one bathroom have a line out the door and like up the stairs was a little bit scary. So our 12 hours in Iceland were enjoyable, and we got to see this one little part of Iceland. So obviously it's on our list. We have to return to see more of the country. Obviously we can't be like, check, we're done.
Obviously.
So yeah, that's Iceland.
That's all for today's episode of Go, See, Do, Explore. Thank you for joining us and sharing in the wonder of travel.
Keep the spirit of today's adventure alive by checking out our blog at goseedoexplore.com for even more travel inspiration.
Don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps fellow travelers find us and join our community.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep traveling by any means necessary.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashley, bidding you farewell and happy exploring.